So what we are going to talk about today is just the different ways you can set up warehousing options within Business Central or NAV. So we're going to look at the various configuration options, the impact of each option, and really how you can match those options to the way you want to work in Business Central or NAV. So I'll use those NAV, Business Central interchangeably, but really we're focusing possibly on Business Central. So in the audience, who here is like a GP partner or somebody new to NAV or Business Central? A few? Okay, how many people do just Business Central Cloud? Anybody? Just NAV or Business Central on-prem? And the rest are a combination, I guess. Okay. And how many of you do warehouse implementations today, or are you doing or have done? Like, what do you need me for? You guys know this stuff, right? Okay, I already asked all those questions, so I'll skip that. So the first question really is, what is WMS to you, right? So what does WMS mean at a high level? It's warehouse management system, right? I expected you guys to answer, but I'll cut you some slack on the first question. So it's a warehouse management system. That's really all it is. And Business Central has a warehouse management system built in, right? So when a lot of people talk about warehouse management systems, they're thinking, we need to go out and buy an external warehouse management system, and it's a big investment and everything else. You don't need to. You've got a lot of that capability built into the system. So as I said on the slide there's a basic and advanced. And the advanced is in quotes, and so is basic, because the basic can get actually quite advanced as well. And advanced, in some ways, forces you into very specific processes that actually make it more basic than the basic stuff does. So how do you set this stuff up? And this is what happens when you write stuff late at night and think you're really funny, and it's not really that funny when you're doing it. Anyway, so this is the location card, or one of the tabs off the location card out of Business Central. It looks the same in NAV, just less pretty sliders there, check boxes. And there's a whole bunch of different ways you can set that up. And Microsoft says there's 6 ways you can do it, and they lie. There's way more than 6. So when they say 6, what you do, if you go on to the docs.microsoft.com or whatever, the documentation for Business Central, they've got a white paper on there. It's very good. If you want to understand sort of the base NAV warehousing or Business Central warehousing capability, it's a good read. And they talk about sort of 6 different levels of warehousing, 6 different ways you can kind of roughly set up a warehouse. There's like 50 different ways you can set that up. By mixing and matching these check boxes, and when you include how you can set up item tracking and everything else, there's a whole bunch of ways you can set this up that can have a big impact on how you deploy that. Okay, so starting with the basics. So when you turn on, now when we talk advanced and basic, this directed put away and pick, that checkbox, when you turn that on, it basically turns on all of those documents, and you don't really have much choice on how you configure it. With that turned off, we've got what we call basic warehousing. And basic warehousing, again, is not necessarily all that basic. It allows you to go in and do quite a bit. Okay, so let's actually have a look at that. Not that you necessarily need to see it, because we just saw it on there. So a lot of this presentation, as soon as I find my mouse, a lot of this I'll actually go through, and I'm going to do it in the Windows client for one reason only. We can do exactly the same thing in the Business Central client as well, all that same capabilities here. But this has the departments menu, which lets me show you a little bit more of the things than we can in Business Central. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show you, when we go into the location settings, right? If we go into the very first one, now if you're in, here's actually a good little tip for you. If you're in Business Central, so if you're in the cloud version or the Business Central on-prem, and you load up sort of the standard Docker image, you don't get all of these warehouses. You get like a few. You get East and West and something else. If you go into Rapid Start, you can load the full configuration package, which gives you all of these options as well, which sort of shows off a much broader set of configuration options than the standard demo data. And what we see when we go into this first one, so I'll go into the blue location, which is the simplest one. Let's just collapse that up. And you can see we've got nothing turned on. So we're not even using bins in this case, and we have nothing turned on. And as we go through, I'll scroll all the way down and I'll get to the white location, which is our advanced warehouse. And when we've turned that on, all the other checkboxes get disabled and we can't mess with it. Okay, so that's really all it is. This is where you're going to start making your first decisions about what you turn on for the location configuration. And the very first thing that you want to talk about is bins. Another late night funny. That's great, Mark. You're awesome. Anyway, bin mandatory. So what is bin mandatory? Who knows what bin mandatory is? Yes. Exactly. Well, yes. I mean, you can put your inventory into bins physically, and you can even tell Nav, hey, I've got these 3 bins for this particular item, and Nav will track that. When you make it bin mandatory, though, what you're saying is we're controlling inventory by bin. So now what happens is I can't do a transaction without specifying which bin it came from. So that's really what it means. I have to tell the system which bin I put or took an item from. And what's the impact of that, do you think? Well, it's extra data entry, but on the plus, and data entry sucks, but the good part of that is, now if I'm looking in the warehouse and I say, hey, where's product A? I can say, well, it's in bin 1, bin 2, bin 3. I know where my product is, and I know how the quantities in each bin. If you don't turn that on, again, I can go in and say, product A could be in bin 1, bin 2, bin 3, but I don't know where it is. I don't know which bin that product is actually physically residing in. If you turn on bin mandatory, then you can track physically which bin it's in. But you do need to be more diligent, right? So if you're not, I won't get into scanning or anything, but if you're not diligent, if people are going, oh, I'm supposed to pick it out of bin 1, but I'm going to grab it out of this bin instead, and they don't tell the system what happens the next pick. It's going to send you to the wrong bin, or you're not going to know where your inventory is, and this will make things very bad for you very quickly. So it is a big decision. A lot of people start out with this. Oh, and before we even get to this, we talked about that location card. I have seen recently a lot of people setting up their systems without any locations at all. I would recommend against that. I mean, it's possible, but you should turn on location mandatory and set up at least one location. It's sort of, and that's in the inventory setup. It's really invisible to the end users for the most part, but it allows you to extend the configuration a lot more easily down the road, especially in Business Central where we can't just jump into SQL and make things happen. Okay, so set up a location even if you don't have multiple locations. So that's actually technically the first decision. The second decision is, do you turn on bins? And those are the things you have to weigh. Do I have a diligent staff, right? Are they going to be able to track which bin they've used and what they're doing and all that sort of thing? And secondly, do I care, right? Maybe I have fixed bins, and physically fixed bins. I have a bin, and that's where that product goes every single time, and it's never anywhere else. Well, why do you need that? You probably don't. You can just use the shelf number on the item or the stock keeping unit card. Okay. So I know I'm talking to you like your end users and you're running a warehouse, but these are the things that you'll be telling your clients, right, or asking your clients when they ask about bins, and you're asking them why they need bins. Okay, so this was actually technically a question to you, but I gave you the answer. The other options are the shelf number, right? Stock keeping unit card has a shelf number if you have multiple locations, or just the shelf number on the item card is informational. It'll tell you, where that product might be, right? And you can go look there first. One other thing I will mention, though, is a lot of the standard nav reports, and this may be changing a little bit with Business Central, but a lot of the standard reports assume that bins are mandatory. So if you print a pick list, it's not printing the shelf number. It thinks it wants to print the bin instead, right? So you won't get things like the shelf number on a pick ticket by default unless you, well, if you turn on bins, you will get it. With shelf numbers, you won't. Okay, so those are some of the things you need to think about with the bins. And by the way, if you have any questions while we're going through this, feel free to interrupt me. Even I get sick of my voice. I'm sure it's worse for you guys. No? Okay, any questions on the bin stuff at all? No? All right. So the next question is, okay, I've turned bins on or I haven't turned bins on, is what type of document do I want to use? Now, Yeah, unfortunately, the animation was supposed to hide that last thing, which is technically the answer. Now I can't bug you for the answers. So anyway, the different types of documents you have really 3 different potential documents. And a document is, what are we going to send to the warehouse for them to do their jobs? Like there's pick tickets, there's receiving documents, there's shipping documents, there's potentially replenishment documents, things like that. And you really have 3 choices of what you send out to the warehouse for them to do their work. The first one is just a report. Anybody know an example of that? Pick instruction. That's a perfect example. I like you. All right, so pick instruction off the sales order is good. It's just a report. It prints what's on the sales lines, and that's what you do. And there's a bunch of those, right? And you can run your warehouse on them. The next one is what we call inventory documents. And an inventory document, I'm probably going to ruin my surprise later, but an inventory document is an order-to-order document, right? So it's very much like a sales order, for using a pick ticket as an example. When I create an inventory document, an inventory pick in that case, is very much like a sales order, but it gives me a few other options there. And the last one is warehouse documents, and that's where we get a little more complicated, where we're turning on extra functionality within the system and really generating different processes within the warehouse. And how do you decide? Well, let's talk about what they do, and then we'll decide. All right, so the inventory documents, now if you're in the Windows client, did they say they were going to put a role center in the BC client, the business center? Anyway, whatever. I wasn't in the general session, but this is why you should be in the What's New session that's going on over there somewhere, because then we'd know the answer to that. Anyway, the order-by-order menu, what I mean is the department menu within NAV. So if I go in there, we can actually see all those documents. In Business Central, you can't really find them very easily. So the key with the inventory documents I mentioned earlier, they're really an order-to-order document type. We have an inventory pick that matches up to one sales order as an example, or one transfer order, or one production order, that type of thing. When we post that inventory document, it actually posts the source document. And so the source document is that sales order or transfer order or whatever. So I generate something called an inventory pick as an example. And I give it out, print it out, and I give it out to the guys in the warehouse. And they do it, and they come back into Business Central or NAV, and they post it. It's actually going to post that sales order, or post the consumption for action, or any of those sorts of things, okay? So that's what we call sort of a single-stage process, where one person goes out there, they physically grab the stuff, they bring it over, they say they're done, and it executes the transactions within Business Central. Good? Everybody good? Well, too bad, I'm going to show it to you anyway. All right, so if we go back in and we look at our fancy thing here, so this guy here, goods handling order by order, that's where we're going to find all those inventory documents. So you can see when we bring that up, we've got inventory picks, inventory putaways, inventory movements. And that, I'm going to rant about inventory movements at some point. But they're all sort of order to order, right? Inventory movements is a little different. An inventory movement moves product from one bin to another. So that's an exception out of those guys. The inventory putaways, inventory picks, when you execute that document, it'll actually post the source. Inventory movement is just moving one product from one area to another. Okay? So if we look at, for example, inventory pick, the way this thing works, and here's the surprise, I actually don't have any. Awesome. So we get to make one. So the way it works, you can create an inventory pick from the source document, where I can come in here, and on a sales order, there's a button that says create pick, or on a transfer order, whatever, I can create the pick. Or I can do it here manually, where I can come in and I can say get source document. It'll list all the orders. I can choose the one I want to use, so there's one for a production order. And it'll generate, assuming there's anything to deal with on that document, it'll generate a list of items I need to go and pick. I print that out, and that's what the warehouse uses. When they come back, they fill in this quantity to handle, and they post that document. And then it posts the consumption or whatever it is in that case. Okay. Any questions about that at all? No? Okay, so again, the key here, order to order, when I post this document, it's going to post as if I'd post that production order or that sales order. Okay. The same thing goes for putaways. Does anybody know what a put away is? Do you guys know what a put away is? So you see here where I picked stuff. A put away is just the exact opposite. I'm just taking something that I've received and I'm putting it into a bin. So put away looks exactly the same. It's just got a list of items and a list of bins. And I use that to actually go place those items in a particular bin. And when I post it, we know where that product went. Now, if I just received against a purchase order, what would happen? Where would that bin information come from, do you think? Who said that? It comes from purchase line. Yeah, it comes from the purchase line, so typically the default bin unless somebody's changed it. So I can post a purchase order and the system just assumes that I put all my product into the default bin. What if I didn't? What if the warehouse guy spread it around, sprinkled it around the warehouse a little bit? With a put away, we can actually indicate all the different bins. And that's a very important point. So the question is, why would I bother using this? If it is order to order, and as soon as I post the pick document and post the sales order, why am I not just using a sales order? Why would you do that?
Because you can use multiple orders in one pick, one put away.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
You can do multiple order references within one pick.
Good. Exactly. When we get to the warehouse picks, yes. On the inventory picks, we can't do that. We get one order per pick, and that's it.
Maybe you don't want your warehouse staff to be going into the stock.
Exactly. Don't like the warehouse going into a sales order and seeing what you're selling this stuff for, what the cost is. So that's the segregation of duties, right? You get to split that up. But I've got sales order shipping screen that does the same thing. I can hide all that detail without using an inventory pick. This is a waste of time, right?
You can split.
See, I knew I liked you. All right. So, excellent. Can you write that down for my wife? I have friends. Friends? All right. That's exactly why you would use it. So when you turn on bins, if you decide you're going to turn on bins, you pretty much are going to turn on inventory picks. The only time you don't is if, again, physically you have one bin where that item is always going to reside and you're never going to find that item anywhere else in the warehouse. Then maybe you don't need inventory picks. But if I've got that same item in multiple places, what do I see on a sales order? I'm selling 100 of these things. The guy goes out in the warehouse. If you have bin mandatory on, again, we have to tell the system which bin we're pulling that item from. And if I grab some from overstock and some from the picking area and there was some sitting in receiving, I got 3 bins I have to indicate. I can't do that on a sales order unless I split up those sales order lines. Sales reps aren't going to want to have to type in a different line on the sales order for every bin you're going to pick from. That sucks. What they want is they just want to enter, I'm selling 100. The warehouse guys are going to get a pick that says, okay, here are the 3 places you can find this item. They go pick it and they register it. Or if they go to a bin and the inventory is inaccurate, they can split that line and you can have multiple pick lines per sales line. And I'm using sales line here, but it applies to any of the source documents, transfer, production, whatever you want. Okay. Questions about that? Oh, good. Yeah. We're getting to that. So the question was wave picking or potentially batch picking. Sometimes people use those terms, interchangeably. They're not really, but yeah, we'll get into that in a sec. Again, inventory picks, that's order by order, inventory documents. So again, this is sort of a decision-making process, a process of elimination. You come in, you say, okay, well, first I'm going to have a location. Then do I need bins? Why do you need bins? Well, if I have the same item in multiple places, if I want to control or want to see exactly where that item is in the warehouse, that sort of thing, you want bins. Okay, I've got bins turned on. Do I need inventory picks and inventory putaways? And then you say, well, yeah, but we want to do batch picking or wave picking or, various other things. Well, that's the next section. We don't use the inventory documents for that. What we use is the warehouse documents. So the big advantage of the warehouse documents, it's been mentioned a couple times here, is that we can have different or multiple source documents per warehouse document. So it's one warehouse document, multiple source documents. In other words, I could have 5 sales orders on one warehouse pick. Okay? And then instead of sending a guy around the warehouse 5 times to pick the same products, I send him out with one pick ticket and he picks it all in one pass. Now, the way you turn on warehouse picks, you don't remember probably, but way back when I showed you all those options, there was no warehouse pick option. There was a receipt option, a shipment option, a pick option, and a put away option. There was no differentiator between inventory and warehouse. The way you turn an inventory pick into a warehouse pick is if you turn on warehouse shipments. And the same goes for putaways. If you turn on require receive, then your putaways become warehouse putaways. So it's a little bit weird, but that's how it works, right? It's if you're doing a shipment, you're going to have a warehouse pick. You're not going to have an inventory pick. Okay, and another couple key points. Registering the warehouse documents doesn't post the source documents. So, like I said before, if I post an inventory pick, that's going to post the shipment. With a warehouse pick, it doesn't do that. So I've now added another layer of segregation. I now have pickers that go out and pick the product, and they say, I'm done. Well, that order hasn't left the building yet, so it doesn't post. I then have to go and do a secondary operation to actually ship that product, and that's why we call that a two-stage process. Okay, so I do a first pick operation, then I drop it off, and then I do a secondary operation to ship it out. All right, any questions about that at all? Yes? Short answer is yes, and there's a few things you can do. Yes, so the short answer is yes, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a sec. Right? So using the pick worksheet, we have a lot of control over how we actually generate those picks and what's on the pick and those sorts of things. So you can limit it to 15 orders on a pick or 15 lines on a pick or specific warehouse special equipment or something like that. And now, one of the things that hurts a little when they're moving to Business Central and extensions only, there's a lot of things you can actually tweak in the base nav code to allow you to do lots of fun stuff, and a lot of that capability is going to go away. And one of the things I was going to rant about, Microsoft came out with these inventory movements a few years ago, and you know, I don't know, I'm not sure what their thought process was, but it's painful. So the issue is, you run into lots of situations where, you know, I still want to go out and do a batch pick. I want to pick 10 orders at a time, and I want to bring it over to shipping, and then I want them to ship. Well, how do we do that? We have to enable that warehouse shipment. What does that mean? Anybody know what a warehouse shipment is? It's on my next slide, but I'll ask you first. Okay, warehouse shipment is another document. So from a sales order, typically, or you can do it outside of a sales order, but you know, a lot of people from a sales order, you say, okay, this sales order needs to go to the warehouse. I'm going to create a warehouse shipment document. Now there's a document that's a warehouse shipment. From that warehouse shipment, I create a warehouse pick. But what if I don't need that? What if I just want to do a two-stage pick that's order to order? I don't want to have that warehouse shipment document. That's what that inventory movement should be able to do. And you can do it if you modify the code. I'm ranting here, I shouldn't get into this. But anyway, you can go in and you can use a warehouse movement, or sorry, an inventory movement to move product from one bin to another for shipping purposes without turning on warehouse shipments. But there's a trick to it. So if any of you are interested, because it happens all the time, you've got a customer that, you know, always does order-to-order picking, and that warehouse shipment is just a superfluous document that they never need to touch, but they're stuck with it. Okay, anyway, that's enough rants. Let's go in and look at the warehouse stuff. So the warehouse documents, if we go back and look at our department menu again, where we'll find those is the goods handling multiple orders. And again, what that means is I can have multiple orders on the same document. And here we have the picks and the putaways and the movements. Now, one other thing, when we get into the orders and contacts, that's the source documents, and planning and execution, we get the warehouse documents. So warehouse shipment, if you're not familiar with them, this is what it looks like. And again, I can create these in a number of different ways. Often people will automate this on the sales order. As soon as they release the sales order, it'll generate a warehouse shipment. Or from here, I could create a new warehouse shipment and use that get source documents up here, or even the filters. So I can say, hey, get me all my DHL shipments that need to go out, and it'll populate this. Now, this warehouse shipment is interesting because I can have multiple sales orders or transfer orders or whatever I like on one shipment. So the purpose of a shipment is really to indicate what you're shipping out on that individual shipment. So I've got a truck coming in, what orders are going on that truck? Here they are, it could be 10 of them. And then from here, I will go in and I'll create a pick, and that'll create a pick for all the items that I need to ship out on this order. So that's really almost order by order. What you can do is you can also use the pick worksheet and a few other tools to generate the pick tickets, and there's some other stuff you can do here to generate multiple shipments automatically as well. Okay. Any questions on we don't have enough time to go through all the details of the warehouse receipts and the warehouse shipments and everything, just touching on a high level. That's how you turn on the two-stage process. You turn on either warehouse shipments or warehouse receipts, and now you've got that two-step process. Okay. Any questions about that at all? Okay. All right. And that is another important decision point, and really the decision point there is, do you have that two-stage process? Or do you need to pick multiple items on the same pick ticket that apply to different orders? Okay, so if you have a customer that says, yeah, we want to pick 5 orders at a time, then you need to turn on those warehouse documents, really, is what it boils down to. Okay. Or a customer says, yeah, we do order by order picking, but we pick everything, we stage it, and then the shipper ships it out in the afternoon. Well, you're probably going to have to turn on that two-stage picking as well there, or hack the inventory movements to do it. Yes, sir.
So, if a customer asks the warehouse department, and okay, I activate Shipment, or you have different fees, and I also activate the warehouse document. They may not need the fees. Why should I be doing the fees? If I can just take it from the fees and assign the PIN number, and then take the different steps, or because the big thing does, for example, an extra step.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So the question was, okay, if I've enabled bins and enabled warehouse documents, why do I actually have to do a pick? Why can't I just execute the warehouse shipment instead of doing a pick? You could do that. The challenge is that it's actually not the pick that's the extra step. It's the warehouse shipment that's the extra step there. And the reason is, you'll notice when we do this warehouse shipment, one of the issues is the bin code. You get one bin. Well, you choose one bin per shipment. So everything I'm shipping is being shipped out of that bin 09001. The intent is, that is my shipping dock. And you can have multiple bins. So you can have bay 1, bay 2, bay 3. And when I pick, the pick is going to say, go get it from my warehouse bins and bring it over to this shipping bin to get shipped out the door. Okay, so you could execute it. You could just print this out and have somebody go find it. But you wouldn't be sending them, you wouldn't know which bin to send them to without the pick. You wouldn't know which bin they took it from without the pick, those sorts of things. Okay. All right. Now, hey, didn't I do that joke already? Anyway, so, oh, that was bin man. Yeah, right. All right, so as you might expect, we call it basic warehousing because the bin selection is basic. Okay, so it's basically going to go through and find the first bin effectively that has product in it and tell you to pick from there first. Okay, it has very few rules or limitations on what it does. It's going to go through and find the first bins and grab that and use it. So on the pick side. On the put away side, it's generally going to find a fixed bin to put that product in. There are some things that they brought in 2013, I think, to allow you to have something called a dedicated bin, which if you have a work center, like let's say you're a manufacturer, and you say, whenever I pick for this production order, I always want to pick to this bin because that's where I've designated the work center at. So there are some things that it can do there with the bins, but generally speaking, it's not all that smart. It's fine for most places. It's good. It gives you a list of bins that have product in and tells you to go pick them. Okay. And this again is another big decision point. How smart do you want that selection to be? Do you have overstock that you're not allowed to pick from? You always want to send people to the picking bins and not the overstock area. And if they do have to pick from overstock, do you want to allow that? Do you want to allow them to go to a pallet and rip it apart and take a few boxes off? Or do you want a more formal process that says, no, you first have to take that overstock, move it into your picking area, and then you're allowed to pick it? So it's a whole bunch of things like that that can determine whether you use the basic or the advanced warehousing. Okay? So selection at time of picking is a big part, and then the other big part is the put away. So when we turn on advanced warehousing, what we've got is something called directed put away. And directed put away, well, I'll get into directed put away tells me where I'm supposed to put that product. Okay. So when we turn on that directed pick and put away box, it does a whole bunch of stuff. So it forces all your warehouse documents turned on. You can't turn them off, so you can't mix and match anymore, right? If you have basic warehousing on, I could use a warehouse pick, but I could just receive against a PO, right? Or I could use a put away, but just pick against the sales order if I wanted, right? So you can mix and match those options. When we turn on directed put away and pick, it's going to force all of that on. It turns it on, and it turns a bunch of other stuff on. So it enables zones and some related information, such as bin types and things like that, where, again, I could designate a bin as something I'm not allowed to pick from. So zones is one if you're doing wave picking you would need. The other one, it disconnects the warehouse from the inventory subledger. Anybody know what I mean by that? No. Some people are saying, yeah, but you're too shy. Pardon me? Yeah, there's a warehouse entries table, which as soon as you turn on bins, you have warehouse entries. So as soon as you turn on bins, there's another table that gets populated called warehouse entries, somewhat similar to item ledger entries, but tracks what's in bins. What this does is transactions that I do in the warehouse, specifically related to bins, do not affect the item ledger entries at all, initially. So that means I can go out there and I can do an inventory adjustment of something, and it'll say, hey, I've got 10 in the bin, but if I look at the quantity on hand on the item card, it says I have 100. What's the deal? Well, I did something in the warehouse. It's no longer directly connected to that inventory subledger. Okay, so that's both good and bad. The good is, again, it's a segregation of duties. The warehouse guys can go ahead and do their things with it was, I think, probably originally done for licensing or something like that, but they can go in and they can do all these adjustments without affecting accounting, really. Accounting doesn't get screwed around with because these guys are up and down in the inventory all day. And at the end of the day or periodically, somebody will go in and run a routine. Anybody know what that is? Close. Calculate warehouse adjustments. And what it'll do is it'll go in and it'll generate all the inventory entries you need to sync up what you have on hand versus what the warehouse thinks you have on hand. Okay? So that's important. Disconnects that subledger. And it provides some tools to optimize the warehouse. So that replenishment. Am I allowed to pick from bulk, or do I need to move items from bulk into picking before I pick? It can automate that process for you. So on a daily basis or hourly basis, it could say, hey, you need to move stuff around in your warehouse to keep it optimized. Okay? Very specific processes that it enforces. It locks you down. You can't get creative. It makes it very strict about what you can and cannot do. And the last one here, if you're on-prem, it enables ADCS, which is the built-in Microsoft scanning capability, which is available if you want to use it. All right, so, is there a question? Yes. On-prem only, yes. For now. There's lots out there. So it's all ISV, and there's a whole bunch that you can, there's a whole bunch here. And oh, the question was, what's that? Oh yeah, there's lots. There's a whole bunch here. Check them all out. Pick the one that's best for you because they're all good, right? But yeah, now Microsoft is almost certainly going to release ADCS for Business Central at some point. I don't know if it'll be any good. The one in Nav is, you can't really use it out of the box. Yeah, And last directions, they actually showed us one of their little power-ups they built, and for some people it'll work, and you know, it'll be like ADCS in the old version. Some people will try it, they'll customize it, but I don't expect it's going to work for most people, you know, very well. Like, it's just not going to work. But we'll see. Maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe it's just wishful thinking. I don't know. Okay. Yes. So there's no direct warehouse connection with directed pick and put away and job planning lines. But you can still do consumption, like you can still do consumption from bins, from the job journal and things like that. There are some gaps, right? There's definitely gaps in the current implementation of the warehousing, right? Job planning lines is one. There's also, yeah, there's also some stuff on the service side, but yeah, I mean, there's workarounds for it. But yeah, picking to jobs is always a question we get, like creating a warehouse pick to fulfill requirements in job planning line. So maybe they'll fix it someday. Yes?
These scenarios that I run into, and I want to make sure to do it, you know, this lot number items with expiration date.
Yes.
Kind of tell them you have to pick this expiration date first.
Yes, I think I'm maybe coming to that, but I'll answer it now, and then we can skip that slide. Yeah, it has FIFO picking, first expired, first out. So you do need, of course, bins enabled, and another setting. So like I said, there's like 50 different ways you can set this up. So to enable that, you have to turn on lot warehouse tracking on the item, and you have to turn on FIFO picking, and then you can do it. And you have to have bins on, of course. Because then with that lot warehouse tracking, you know which lot is in which bin, which is another decision point to make. Actually, that is a slide later on. Another decision, do you care which serial number or which lot number is in which bin? That's an option you can turn on. That's independent, that's done at the item level, not at the warehouse level. Okay. All right, so we talked a little bit about directed, and when you want to use directed pick and put away, or directed put away and pick to be more appropriate, those are some rules of thumb, right? Same item in multiple bins, and more specifically, where you want to control which bins are picked from, right? You want to say, I'm not allowed to pick from bin A, I can only pick from bin B. Or I want to pick from bin C first, and if that, regardless of what it's named, and if that one's empty, then you can go to bin B, that type of thing. So that same item is in multiple bins is one of the decision points. Another one is stocking that item in multiple units of measure. So standard nav Business Central can't do that. You can go into the bin contents. Anybody use item bin contents? You can go in there and you can define a bin and say, hey, this one holds boxes and this one holds pieces. It doesn't work. It always defaults to your base unit of measure, unless you turn on directed pick and put away. Now the other thing is, don't store multiple units of measure in the same bin. Like, that's dumb. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's rude. It causes problems, right? It causes problems if a warehouse worker goes up and you've got both eaches and boxes in a bin, and it says pick 3, and he grabs 3 boxes, and you know, it causes hassles. So, you know, tell your customers to avoid that, but the system does support it. And if it tells him to pick 3 eaches, and he gets to the bin, and there's 3 cases, it'll break it apart for him. It'll tell him to break apart a case and take 3 eaches up. Okay, so it's another one. And incidentally, you can do that without the directed pick turned on. All right, and the last one, the wave picking. If you want to do wave picking. Now, what's wave picking? Because there's always multiple definitions of this. It's like a wave, right? You send a whole bunch of people out. I've got row 1, somebody else has got row 2, somebody else has got row 3, and they move through the warehouse like a wave. You really need the zones to be able to do that in any sense, right? You can't really do that very easily without turning that on. There's some, if you want to get creative, you might, but that's when you want to start looking at directed pick and put away. Now, I think the batteries are dying on this. I'm sick of my voice too. Batch picking, or 2 seconds. Batch picking is not wave picking. Batch picking is where I have multiple orders, multiple source documents on the same pick, right? Where I'm going out. And again, your terminology might vary, but if you're talking to me, I'll understand batch that way and wave the other way. So we have multiple orders batched together in one pick. And you can do that without turning on directed pick. Yes, sir. Question?
If temperature control, are you typically recommend people
Zone is good. Warehouse class is another one that's often used. It'll depend on the circumstance. Yeah, so the question was, if you have like if you have a freezer, how do you indicate what belongs in a freezer and what doesn't? So there's a couple of options. There's warehouse class, there's zones, there's that sort of thing. But warehouse class would be a typical one, yeah, at the item level. Yes, it does. If you use zones, then it'll limit that wave picking. Now, there are some issues with the warehouse class code in that I then have to receive all those things individually as well, or independently, right? For each different warehouse class, I'd have a different receipt that I need to do. So you'd have to mess with it to get it the way you want, but there are options for that. Any other questions? All right. So when to stay basic, if none of the other things apply, then you stay basic. What I typically tell people is probably 80% of the people that are using the advanced probably don't need to. Now, whether that's hurting them or not, it depends, right? If they're all paper-based, they should probably stay away from the directed put away and pick, most likely, because it's going to add some additional things to their processing that are going to cause them problems. But again, those are some of the decisions or the questions you need to ask to make that decision. Okay. All right, so some related decisions. We've talked about this already. The item tracking, so the lot warehouse tracking and the serial warehouse tracking. Again, that lets you see which serial numbers or lot numbers in a bin. And that's important for expiry date picking or recalls, like lot numbers specifically. People want to know which lot number is in there. The other thing, I mean, that's sort of outside the warehouse stuff, is even just how you want to track lot numbers and serial numbers. So some people turn on, do you know what lot specific tracking or serial specific tracking is? Anybody not know? I'll just assume you all don't know and tell you anyway. So when you turn on specific tracking, it means you're tracking that lot number or serial number throughout its life cycle. I receive it, I know when I received it, I know where I put it, you know, I know when I sold it, I know when I scrapped it, I've got that traceability all the way through. In some cases, that's overkill, right? If I'm a retailer, I only want to care about a serial number when I sell it. I don't really need to, I'm not going to get a recall on a serial number and have to go find it in a bin, most likely. So that's another decision you need to make. Do you actually want to turn on that tracking all the way through the system? A lot of people think, oh, I need to track serial numbers, and they hit the big buttons, specific tracking, and it becomes very painful in the warehouse, because now you got to deal with serial numbers all the time, right? So another decision, something else to think about is the item tracking when you go into this. All right. And I'm going to skip that because it's a little ancillary, but if you have questions, you can ask me after. All right. Inventory counts. So there's really two ways you do inventory counts. If you have directed pick and put away turned on, there's something called a warehouse physical inventory journal that you use. And it's very much like what I talked about when you do that inventory adjustment. I go in, I do an adjustment. It doesn't actually take hold in the accounting world or the item subledger until I run that adjustment process, okay? The other one is just the physical inventory journal, and that's immediate. As soon as I count and I post, that posts and it's done. Okay, so that's another consideration. Nobody's going to make a decision on that, but it's something to keep in mind. And then in Business Central, in the new release, they've got this inventory count document that's out, which, you know, is meant for non-advanced warehousing. So if you want to use that, I think you can only use it with the basic warehousing, but I haven't seen the full release yet. Any questions on the inventory count stuff? I love inventory counts, they're awesome. All right, so we're finishing pretty much right on time. Any questions about any of this stuff?
Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel.